Welcome to the first Euro Fantasy Football video and podcast on this channel. I have covered Euro Fantasy before, back in Euro 2020, and I'm here again covering Euro Fantasy 2024. So subscribe to the channel, smash the like button, all that good stuff, and let's try to get this video to the 200 likes on YouTube. And our aim is to get to 24,000 subscribers by the end of the Euro tournament. And I also cover FPL and UCL Fantasy. There are videos coming up for the Champions League final in Matchday 13, so be sure to tune in for that, as well as a deadline stream on the Saturday. And I did cover World Cup Fantasy for Qatar 2022. So all of these fantasy games are covered on this channel, and all your support is greatly appreciated. You can join the FPL League. You can see the league code right in front of you, and throughout this video you can see on the left hand side there's an auto join link in the description below, and of course the league code, which is JCRHjQ. So be sure to join that as well and see if you can win the FPL Dylan mini league. But let's get straight into this video and podcast. I'll be highlighting my 15-man squad, the first one I've created for Euro Fantasy, and talk about why I've picked some of these players with some key stats and also observations about some of the best options in Euro Fantasy. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. We start off with a 100 million budget, just like in FPL and UCL Fantasy, and speaking of which, that latter fantasy format is very similar to Euro Fantasy, especially with certain points like ball recoveries. And if you want me to, I can make a how to play guide for Euro Fantasy 2024. I've done so in the past for UCL Fantasy and the previous Euro tournament, and I'd be very happy to do that again. Also a chip strategy guide, future draft videos and podcasts, and of course team selections, best limitless and wildcard teams from Matchday 2 onwards, deadline streams, and much more. But let's start off with the goalkeepers, work our way out through the field, and talk about some of the best options you can buy with just 100 million in budget. You have to make some sacrifices, and if you want to have some of the best options up front, your midfield might look a bit weaker, and it's just about striking that balance and going for something that you really want to have. And also bear in mind that you'd want to have a balance in terms of players from each day, because you can change the captaincy in Euro Fantasy, and it maximizes your chance of getting points through the substitutions you can make throughout the match day, and that's what gives you more control of your Euro Fantasy squads, and you can micromanage your team every step of the way. But let's start off with the goalkeepers, and we've got some great picks in this position. Kick things off, I'm going for the highest owned goalkeeper in Euro Fantasy at the moment with 22% ownership, and that's Jordan Pickford, who's priced at 5 million and starts the campaign with Serbia, and he produced 4 clean sheets out of the last 6 games in the Premier League, and only David Raya kept more clean sheets in that competition, and Pickford ended up being the highest scoring goalkeeper in FPL with 153 points. He has kept 28 clean sheets in 60 England caps with 45 goals conceded, and in Euro 2020 he kept 5 clean sheets out of 7 matches as England reached a final and lost on penalties to Italy, but only 1 clean sheet was kept in the last 5 matches for England with Jordan Pickford in goal. And the group opponents are Serbia, Denmark and Slovenia, so it looks quite favourable for England, who are one of the favourites to win the competition. So I think Pickford is a very solid choice, but the alternative to cover that England defence will be Harry Maguire, who's also priced at 5 million, but he's also more of a differential, and that's something I am considering, maybe even both if you don't go for a midfielder like Bellingham, Saka or Foden. And of course Harry Kane up front will be one of the best options in the entire game. But the second goalkeeper is also quite template, but don't worry, things get more interesting as we go through the field, and there'll be some big differentials in here. But I'm going for Lunin, who is the second highest owned goalkeeper in Euro Fantasy. He's priced at 4.5 million. He has been incredible in the Champions League. I've been talking about him so much in UCL Fantasy. I've got him in my team, but he won't start the Champions League final, which I'll cover in the Champions League videos and podcasts. He has kept 12 clean sheets out of 31 matches this season with Real Madrid, and he also has started the last 2 games for Ukraine. Before that, it was Trubin who was starting most of the matches for the national team, and Lunin has kept 5 clean sheets out of a possible 11 matches on the international stage. So I think Lunin is a decent option, and his group opponents are Romania, Slovakia and Belgium. So he's a good option on paper for matchday 1 and 2. not so much to round off the group stages, but that's something we can talk about with the chip strategies, as we have two boosters available. The wild card, which is pretty much the same as it is in FPL and UCL Fantasy, and the limitless. If you have played UCL Fantasy, you will be used to that. That is where you can build a squad for a specific match day, a bit like a free hit with no budget restrictions whatsoever. But I can delve into details in a chip strategy guide and also in the how to play video and podcast as well. But those are the two goalkeepers, a combined total of 9.5 million, and you've got two very template picks in here, but they've got the possibilities of clean sheets, some favourable fixtures, and they kind of suit all strategies across the board, whether you use the wildcard and or limitless in the group stages or save them for later in the competition. I promised some differentials, and Castagna is only owned by 4% of managers in Euro Fantasy. He has registered 1 goal and 1 assist in the last 5 Premier League matches, and in the Premier League, across the whole season, he scored once and assisted thrice, producing over 100 FPL points for a second consecutive season, and his record is very impressive on the international stage. He has kept 6 clean sheets out of the last 7 matches for Belgium, with 6 starts and 1 assist in that time frame, and his overall record for Belgium includes 2 goals and 5 assists in 41 matches. So very impressive stats there for Castagna, who's priced at 5 million, and his group comprises of Slovakia, Romania and Ukraine. I think matchday 3 could be quite tough, but the first 2 match days look very good for Belgium on paper, and they could be a dark horse for this tournament because their golden generation has slipped by, but this could be the time where they go one step further and reach their first final in either a Euros or World Cup tournament. But now the next defender is a bit of a tricky one because he's very good for ball recoveries. I've talked about him a lot in UCL Fantasy this season, but he's not the most nailed on player, and that's something to bear in mind when making this pick, and that's Jules Koundé. And for France, he has started only 3 of the last 6 matches, with the likes of Klaus and Pavard providing stern competition for that right back spot. Koundé can also play as a centre back, but he never really plays there for France, so this could be a bit of a tricky pick. I might reconsider this and maybe go for Maguire in this position instead and double up on England defensively, or just go in another completely different route and cover another team instead. I'm not a big fan of defensive double ups, especially in these kind of international tournaments, but of course there are some exceptions to be made, and I do think Koundé can be a good option, but he's not the most nailed on in my opinion. He might start the first 2 matches in the group stages, then be rested, especially if France do secure early qualification for the knockouts. But he is ideal for ball recoveries, as I mentioned earlier. So for every 3 ball recoveries a player makes, you gain 1 point, and this goes for defenders, midfielders and forwards. So any outfield player will have this stat, and Koundé is one of the best in the business in my opinion, but he has no goals or assists in 26 appearances for France, so that's a very terrible record. Hopefully he can get an attacking contribution in this tournament. His ownership is 7%, so another low owned player, priced at 5 million, and France have Austria, the Netherlands and Poland in their group. That's a pretty decent one, but Koundé really favours those that maybe just have a matchday 1 squad, you focus entirely on this one, then you wildcard and limitless in matchdays 2 and 3. But next up is another defender I'm not completely sure about, but he has started the last 2 games for Germany, and he's even scored his first goal on the international stage, and that is Mittelstadt, who also helped Stuttgart finish second above Bayern Munich, and he's had a very impressive season in the Bundesliga with 2 goals and 4 assists in 23 starts in that competition. And I also think that goal against France might give him a good chance of being the starting left back for Germany. In the previous tournament for World Cup, it was actually David Raum starting there, and he was a good option despite Germany's early exit. But if Mittelstadt can nail down a spot in that Germany team, he can be an absolute bargain at 4.5 million, and his ownership is 6%. So watch out for Mittelstadt. He could be a great option to cover the Germany defence, and their opponents include Scotland, and that's going to be the opening game of the Euros as Germany are the hosts. They also have Hungary and Switzerland, so that's a tough group. Hungary are quite underrated, and Switzerland can always provide stern tests for the best of teams in Europe, but I think Mittelstadt could be the very best option. I know some people are looking at Rudiger, who'll be the template pick, I think this could be much better value for money if he can nail down that spot. But the fourth defender could be a fantastic option. He's done it in UCL Fantasy for the past 2 seasons for Inter Milan. He's got a lot of goal potential. He can get some assists and the odd ball recovery here and there. And that's going to be DeMarco, who's priced at 5 million and he's got 13% ownership. He produced 14 goal contributions this season across 40 games with 6 goals and 8 assists. That is terrific for a defender. He played a key role in helping Inter Milan lift the Serie A title and also the Supercoppa Italiana. He has started 4 of the last 6 games for Italy and he hasn't been great in all of those appearances, but 3 clean sheets were kept in the process and he provided an assist in a 5-2 win against North Macedonia. His ownership is 13% as I mentioned earlier, and the group is actually very tough. After Albania in Matchday 1, it's Spain and Croatia, so you could argue this is the toughest group to call. You've got 3 teams with a lot of quality that could even reach the semi-final stages or beyond, and they're all packed in that group. And DeMarco is probably ideal for those that want to focus on Matchday 1, then use the wildcard and limitless chips in Matchdays 2 and 3, which tends to be a very popular strategy in Euro Fantasy and also in UCL Fantasy, which is identical to this tournament. So just bear that in mind. I think DeMarco is the best Italy defender, and with Destiny Udogie injured, that opens up the way, and also just making DeMarco a very nailed on option on the left hand side, and DeMarco was the starting left back regardless, so I think he's a very good pick in the heart of this defense. But finally, we're going to go for a template pick with a lot of potential in terms of goals and assists. He is a bit of a yellow card magnet, which can be a concern, but with 21% ownership and a price tag of 6 million, I still think João Cancelo is fully worth it. And Portugal, despite that 2-0 loss to Slovenia, they had won 11 consecutive games before that, keeping 9 clean sheets in the process, and João Cancelo has scored 2 goals in his last 4 matches for Portugal. His overall record on the international stage is 10 goals and 6 assists in 51 appearances, which is very impressive for a defender. You don't need me to tell you that. And I think Cancelo is one of the best options in this position, and their group opponents for Portugal include Czech Republic, Turkey and Georgia. So I have to say he suits all chip strategies, whether you use wildcard and or limitless in the group stages. No matter what you do, I think Cancelo's a good pick regardless, and you don't have to have too many concerns about that whatsoever. So that is the defensive line. We've got a bit of balance, no defensive double ups whatsoever. If I were to go for one, I think England is very likely, and I'd go for Harry Maguire over Mittelstadt or Jules Koundé. But if all of these defenders can nail down a spot, and we know that will be the case for Castagna, Cancelo and DeMarco, but if the same can be said for Koundé and Mittelstadt, I think this defensive line could be locked in for Matchday 1. I'm getting the worst midfielder pick out of the way in Højbjerg. He's 5.5 million. He's an enabler by pure definition, and just hear me out because he has had a poor season for Tottenham Hotspur and he produced no goal contributions whatsoever at club level, but he scored in his last international appearance against the Faroe Islands in a 2-0 victory for Denmark, and he has 2 goals and 1 assist for Denmark in the last 8 matches, with 8 goals and 10 assists in 75 caps for his country. So I do think Højbjerg can be a good option, but of course 5.5 million, he's just going to be there to make up the numbers, and most importantly of all, I think the ball recoveries is what could make Højbjerg a decent option. As we saw a few years ago in UCL Fantasy, when Spurs were last in the Champions League, Højbjerg would get 4 to 5 points on average because of ball recoveries, and his record on the international stage is much better in terms of goals and assists, and that's where I think Højbjerg can be a good option and a bit underrated. His ownership is only 1%, and there's probably a good reason for that, but I think with ball recoveries, a decent goal and assist record for Denmark, I think he could be a quietly underrated option that gets about his business and does a very good job as a 5.5 million midfielder. But let's now move on to better picks who are going to be much more exciting, but this is the second highest owned midfielder in the game. So from that perspective, not so interesting, but Wirtz I think is fully worth it. His price is 7.5 million. You could argue that's criminally underpriced considering the season he just had, with 18 goals and 20 assists in 49 appearances, and Bayer Leverkusen won 43 out of 52 matches overall, only losing in the Europa League final against Atalanta, and it was a battering 3-0, a Lookman masterclass, but overall Bayer Leverkusen have been incredible, winning the Bundesliga unbeaten and also the DFB Pokal, the German Cup as well. But despite an incredible club record, Wirtz has only scored once for Germany in 16 appearances, and that came against France, but he has 4 assists as well on the international stage. And I think it's only a matter of time before the likes of Musiala and Wirtz start upping the goal contributions for their country and Germany become a serious force once again. The ownership is very high, but the group is obviously pretty decent, as mentioned earlier, with Scotland, Hungary and Switzerland. As for Denmark, of course, with Højbjerg, he has Slovenia, England and Serbia. So once again, you could argue Matchday 2 doesn't look too great, but Højbjerg can get some ball recovery points regardless of the opposition. Let's now move on to the other 3 midfielders, and this is going to be a bit of a folk hero and a great option in previous Euro tournaments. He has an amazing record for Switzerland, and that's Xherdan Shaqiri, but his level has obviously dropped. He's aging, approaching the twilight of his career, but I still think he can do the business in Euro 2024. He has scored 2 goals and 1 assist in the MLS in just 12 appearances, but much more impressive is his record for Switzerland with 30 goals and 34 assists in 121 caps for his country. He scored the winner in his last international appearance against the Republic of Ireland, a 1-0 victory, and he took a penalty very recently against Andorra back in September, so that could be very interesting if he's also on penalties. His ownership is only 1%. I told you there would be differentials in this first draft, and some of them will stick by the time we get to the team selection and the deadline stream for the Euro Fantasy Tournament, and his price is only 6.5 million, and Switzerland have Hungary, Scotland and Germany in their group as well. But now we're going for a sort of premium option. You could maybe say he's a mid-priced one, but Bruno Fernandes for me is fantastic for Portugal, and he's had an incredible end to his season at Manchester United. He had a slow start, but in the last 15 matches, that's 9 goals and 7 assists for Bruno Fernandes, and he also got the assist for the winner for Manchester United against Man City in the FA Cup final. 77 FPL points in the last 10 Premier League starts there for Bruno Fernandes, and 4 consecutive seasons producing over 150 FPL points. 3 goals and 3 assists in his last 5 games for Portugal, and his overall record is very good with 39 goal contributions in 64 games overall. And he's the main penalty taker when Cristiano Ronaldo isn't on the pitch, which is another string to his bow. And I do think Bruno Fernandes could be one of the best midfielders in the game. His ownership is 18%, and he's priced at 9 million with a group of Czech Republic, Turkey and Georgia, which is very favourable indeed, as covered earlier with Joao Cancelo. But the final midfielder I'm not so sure about. I have to say, apart from Højbjerg, this is probably the weakest pick in this midfield, and that's Arda Güler, but he's in great form for Real Madrid with 5 goals in his last 5 starts for Los Merengues, and for Turkey only 1 goal in 6 appearances, but he's got 7% ownership, a price tag of 6 million, and a decent group of Georgia, Portugal and Czech Republic. So Matchdays 1 and 3 look good, Matchday 2 not so much, which can be quite awkward for those of you that aren't using the wildcard or limitless in that Matchday. But I still think Güler could be a decent option, but I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure about him at the moment. I think he has a lot of potential, and Turkey of course were a dark horse in the last Euro tournament, but that didn't go according to plan, and this could be a very risky pick in this position. But that's the midfield line. Let's now complete this squad with the 3 forwards, and there are some big hitters in this position. Romelu Lukaku had an awful World Cup in Qatar. He missed some big chances as Belgium crashed out in the group stages, but his overall record for Belgium is incredible. And even for Roma this season, 21 goals and 4 assists in 47 appearances is decent, but look at his international record. In the last 10 matches for Belgium, he has 15 goals and 2 assists with no blanks in the last 5 games. And of course, that's a great response after a terrible World Cup. And his record for Belgium overall is 83 goals and 17 assists in 114 matches, which is incredible. He has more goals than Pele on the international stage, but of course, there are some very big factors for that, weaker opponents in Euro qualifiers and World Cup qualifiers, but be that as it may, Lukaku is a goal scoring machine for Belgium. He's the main penalty taker for them with 9% ownership and a price tag of 9 million as well, and his group comprises of Slovakia, Romania and Ukraine, so I could back him to do very well in all 3 of those match days. Maybe not so much in the knockouts, but we'll get to that when the time comes. And now for 2 template picks in the forward position, starting with Harry Kane, who's arguably the best striker in the world right now. He rounded off this season with 5 goals and 2 assists in the last 5 matches with 0 blanks for Bayern Munich. and his overall record was 44 goals and 12 assists in his debut season for the Bavarians, and he was the joint top scorer in the Champions League this season with Mbappe. Unless the likes of Vinicius get a hat-trick in the Champions League final, Harry Kane should win that golden boot for the Champions League as well. 62 goals and 19 assists in 89 appearances for England, the main penalty taker of course, and he's got a great record in the last 15 matches on the international stage with 13 goals and 5 assists. There's a reason why his ownership is almost 50% and his price is 11 million as well. The group is very strong in terms of England's chance of winning it quite comprehensively, so I do think it's going to be very favourable for England from match days 1 to 3 with Serbia, Denmark and Slovenia as well. But Denmark were quite tough for them back in Euro 2020 in the semi-final stages of course, but I do think things are a bit different this time round. And finally, we're going for one of the most template picks I've seen in quite a while in any fantasy game, and that's Mbappe, who has 76% ownership. And this might surprise you, he has never scored in the Euros before, but he only played in Euro 2020 with 4 games there and 2 assists. He will score this time round, I'm almost certain of that, and I do think he's a great option for Euro 2024 in Germany. Any stats I read for Kylian Mbappe in the Champions League, his record for Paris Saint-Germain or for France are going to be very impressive. There's no need to go into all of that. We all know the quality of player we're talking about, a Ballon d'Or contender. He will win one in the future as well. But in his last 10 matches for France, he has 13 goals and 7 assists, which includes a hat-trick in a World Cup final. That goes to show the quality that Kylian Mbappe possesses, and his price is 11 million, just like Harry Kane, and the group opponents are Austria, Netherlands and Poland. So all of these picks I think are very strong. There's a few that you could have some reservations about, and I think the main ones would be Højbjerg, Güler, Mittelstadt and Koundé. But apart from that, the rest could well easily be in my final team for match day 1. An alternative pick in the forward position is actually Dovbyk from Ukraine, who won the Golden Boot in La Liga with a hat-trick in a 7-0 win over Granada. He's had a great season with Girona, so he could be one to look at 7.5 million with 8 goals and 3 assists in 25 caps for Ukraine. But I'm very happy with this forward line. Ideally, this would be the final front three I have for match day 1, but the midfield could do some work, and I do think 1 or 2 picks in the defensive line also could pose some problems, especially in terms of rotation. But let me now show you the starting 11 and the bench and talk about briefly how the captaincy and substitutions will work and how you want to order your squad when you're building your starting 11 for Euro Fantasy. Between the sticks, I'd go for Jordan Pickford and a back four of Castagna, Koundé, Mittelstadt and DeMarco, a midfield three of Højbjerg, Wirtz and Shaqiri, and up front we've got Lukaku, Kane and Mbappe. The bench looks very strong with Lunin, Cancelo, Fernandes and Güler. And why do I have some very good options on my bench? If we sort it out by date, you can see that the likes of Cancelo and Fernandes play on the 18th of June, which is the last day for match day 1. So the way this works is, for example, let's say Højbjerg blanks on the 16th. You can then substitute him out after his game is completed and before the likes of Güler, Fernandes and Cancelo start their matches, and you can bring those players on for Højbjerg or whoever turns out to be your lowest scoring players in the starting 11. And I've got Wirtz as the captain because Germany play on the 14th of June to kick off the Euro tournament, and if Wirtz doesn't do that well or I want more points from my captain, I can switch the captaincy to someone who plays on the 15th of June. And for example, I'd go for DeMarco in this instance, and if DeMarco blanks, I can then switch him to a player who plays on the 16th of June and vice versa until match day 1 is completed. So that's how substitutions and the captaincy work. You'll get substitution windows which are made very clear in the matches section and also on the right hand side of your starting 11 in Euro Fantasy. If you've played UCL Fantasy, it's the exact same formula as you would get there, so this is going to be kind of like second nature to you. But for those that play FPL or other fantasy games, this will be quite different, and if you have played Euros in the past or the World Cup, it also is very similar to that. But unlike the World Cup fantasy, you can't make transfers within a match day. Any transfers you do make will be for the next match day. The only thing you can do is change the captaincy and make substitutions. And in terms of the captains, I'm going for Wirtz on the first day. On the 15th of June, I don't have that many options, but I think Shaqiri or DeMarco would definitely spring to mind. On the 16th of June, I've got Harry Kane. On the 17th, it's between Mbappe or Lukaku for the armband. And on the 18th, a Portugal player is very likely, so either Cancelo or Bruno Fernandes. So that's the way I will structure it. And of course, you can also change the goalkeeper with substitutions. If picked for blanks, I can then bring on Lunin on the 17th of June as well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Which picks have you gone for in your first drafts for Euro Fantasy? There's still a bit of a while left until match day 1, around 17-18 days from the time of this recording, but there'll be plenty of content headed your way. If you want to see a how to play guide and also much more like a chip strategy, best goalkeepers, best defenders, midfielders and forwards, and also team selections, limitless and wildcard teams every single match day from match day 2 onwards, deadline streams, then smash the like button and let's get this video to over 200 likes and let's keep on pushing towards 24,000 subscribers and beyond. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the other links in the description below for my Patreon, the Championships Discord server, the Euro Fantasy League, and much more, such as my Spotify and Amazon Music. Leave a 5-star review on my podcast. It goes a long way to supporting the channel. I wish you all the best of luck for Euro Fantasy from match day 1 all the way until the very end of the competition, and I'll see you next time.